David has just had an incredible encounter with King Saul. He had a chance to kill King Saul in a cave, but he refused, saying he would not stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed. Saul actually wept when David told him this. Saul even told David, "I know that you will surely be king." Let's see what Israel's future king is up to in this chapter. I'm in chapter 25, verse 1, reading from the New American Standard Version. Then Samuel died, and all Israel gathered together and mourned for him and buried him at his house in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. All Israel mourns for Samuel, and we pause as well because he was such a remarkable man of God and prophet of God. We remember the first chapter in this book when Hannah poured out her heart to God, praying for a son, and how she rejoiced in chapter 2 after God had answered that prayer. Hannah and her husband Elkanah dedicated Samuel to the Lord and took him to the house of the Lord where he was raised. This is the man who led Israel as the last judge, and we're told in 1 Samuel 3:19, the Lord was with him and let none of his words fail. Samuel anointed both Saul and David, and it says here that all Israel gathered together and then that David arose. I don't know if that's an indication that David was actually among the gathering or if he was mourning from where he was. But he then went down to the wilderness of Paran. Continuing verse 2, now there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel, and the man was very rich, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And it came about while he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. And the woman was intelligent and beautiful in appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. That David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. I perk up a little whenever I see a reference to Caleb. He had such a heart to cling to God. You may remember the 12 spies that Moses sent out to check out the land that God had promised. 10 of them gave a bad report saying there were giants in the land and there was no way they could take it. 2 of the men said basically they needed to trust God and that he would do it. Those 2 men were Joshua and Caleb. God said of Caleb in Numbers 14:24, but my servant Caleb, because he has had a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it. Nabal is a descendant of this great man of faith. Continuing verse 5, so David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go up to Carmel, visit Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus you shall say, have a long life, peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. Now I have heard that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we have not insulted them, nor have they missed anything all the days they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we have come on a festive day. Please give whatever you find at hand to your servants and to your son David. This is a very reasonable request, and not only because Nabal is very rich. David and his men have protected Nabal's shepherds and sheep in the wilderness. Now that those sheep are being sheared, David is asking if he would be willing to share out of his abundance to help David and his men. Continuing verse 9, when David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all these words in David's name. Then they waited. But Nabal answered David's servants and said, "Who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men whose origin I do not know?" Notice the emphasis on the fact that it was David making this request. Verse 5, David told his men to greet Nabal in my name. Verse 8, they said, "Please give whatever you find to your servants and to your son David." Verse 9, they spoke according to all these words in David's name. And Nabal's response, "Who is David? And who is the son of Jesse?" I think he was saying this rhetorically, because who didn't know who David was? People within Israel and outside of Israel knew David because of his fame in killing the giant Goliath and defeating Israel's enemies. He was so famous the women sang songs about him, which was what got Saul jealous. And also, Nabal clearly knows who David's father is, Jesse. I think Nabal is saying, "Who is David to me? So what?" David is asking. "It doesn't mean I have to give him my bread and my meat." Further proof he knows who David is when he says there are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master. He knows David is on the run from Saul and thus in dire need of food. And I doubt he's refusing to help because he's afraid of Saul, like some of the people in the cities have been. We're told Nabal is harsh and evil. He's acting out of his nature. Continuing verse 12, so David's young men retraced their way and went back. And they came and told him according to all these words. David said to his men, "Each of you gird on his sword." So each man girded on his sword, and David also girded on his sword, and about 400 men went up behind David, while 200 stayed with the baggage. So in the last chapter, David knew he could not seek revenge against Saul. He knew he could not return evil for evil. He was bothered even when he cut off the edge of Saul's robe. David is one of the few people in the Bible whose life we get to follow over the course of years. The highs and the lows. A man who loves God and is also very much human. I am so grateful that God has given us David's life as an example. We know what it's like to get offended when somebody does something that's just wrong and insulting. Taking offense, even taking revenge, returning evil for evil, those are natural responses. God calls us to live supernaturally, overlooking offenses, loving our enemies, overcoming evil with good, and He makes it possible by His Spirit. Now, most of us, if we take offense, we might just stew over it for a little while. David is a warrior. He is about to take Nabal out. Continuing verse 14, but one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, "Behold, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he scorned them." Notice he said David sent messengers. He didn't need to explain who David was. Yet the men were very good to us, and we were not insulted, nor did we miss anything as long as we went about with them, while we were in the fields. They were a wall to us, both by night and by day, all the time we were with them, tending the sheep. Now, therefore, know and consider what you should do. For evil is plotted against our master and against all his household, and he is such a worthless man that no one can speak to him. So somehow this young man knows that David is about to seek revenge. He knows exactly who to go to, and Abigail knows exactly what to do. Continuing verse 18, then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves of bread and 2 jugs of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 measures of roasted grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and loaded them on donkeys. She said to her young men, go on before me. Behold, I am coming after you. But she did not tell her husband, Nabal. Wow, is she serious or what? And we know why she didn't tell her husband. He would have rebuked her, told her not to give it, and his own foolishness would have cost many lives. Continuing verse 20, it came about as she was riding on her donkey and coming down by the hidden part of the mountain, that behold, David and his men were coming down toward her. So she met them. Now David had said, surely in vain I have guarded all that this man has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. May God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave as much as 1 male of any who belong to him. David is not just planning to kill Nabal, but every male in the household. You can see him just fuming as he makes his way to Nabal's homestead. Verse 23, when Abigail saw David, she hurried and dismounted from her donkey and fell on her face before David and bowed herself to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, on me alone, my lord, be the blame. And please let your maidservant speak to you, and listen to the words of your maidservant. When you come with that much humility, how can a person not listen? David is angry, his mind set on revenge. And here's this beautiful woman who comes bowing down, saying she's to blame. You know he wants to hear what she has to say. Verse 25, please do not let my lord pay attention to this worthless man Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. And Nabal does literally mean fool. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my lord, whom you sent. Now we might say, look how she's talking about her husband, calling him worthless, just gonna throw him under the bus. Well, first, it was true, and David needed to understand the kind of person Nabal was. He needed to know this isn't out of character. He didn't have it out for you in particular. He's just foolish and harsh with everybody. Better to throw him under the bus than let him run into David's sword. Continuing verse 26, now therefore, my lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, since the Lord has restrained you from shedding blood and from avenging yourself by your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek evil against my Lord be as Nabal. Now let this gift, which your maidservant has brought to my Lord, be given to the young men who accompany my Lord. Please forgive the transgression of your maidservant, for the Lord will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil will not be found in you all your days. Abigail knows God's plans for David, and this is amazing to me. She knows God has restrained him from shedding blood and from avenging himself by his own hand. I don't know if she's talking about this moment that she knows David will not follow through with what he's planned, or if she somehow knows what happened with Saul. Either way, God is clearly in this, giving her words that will impact David. She continues, "Should anyone rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, then the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living with the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord does for my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and appoints you ruler over Israel, this will not cause grief or a troubled heart to my Lord, both by having shed blood without cause and by my Lord having avenged himself. When the Lord deals well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant." Wow! Is this God or is this God? These are prophetic words. These are words filled with divine wisdom. God has literally stopped David in his tracks through this woman. And David knows it. He sees God's hand. Continuing verse 32. Then David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. And blessed be your discernment, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from bloodshed and from avenging myself by my own hand. Nevertheless, as the Lord God of Israel lives, who has restrained me from harming you, unless you had come quickly to meet me, surely there would not have been left to Nabal until the morning light as much as one male." So David received from her hand what she had brought him and said to her, "Go up to your house in peace. See, I have listened to you and granted your request." In the last chapter, we read from Romans 12, and we have to read this again. Starting at verse 17, "Never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all men. If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says the Lord." God was gracious to stop David from taking this matter into his own hands. Continuing verse 36, "Then Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she did not tell him anything at all until the morning light. But in the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, so that he became as a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died." God wasted no time taking care of Mr. Nabal. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal and has kept back his servant from evil. The Lord has also returned the evil doing of Nabal on his own head." Then David sent a proposal to Abigail to take her as his wife. Remember in verse 31, Abigail had said, "When the Lord deals well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant." David remembered her. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they spoke to her, saying, "David has sent us to you to take you as his wife." She arose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, "Behold, your maidservant is a maid to wash the feet of my Lord's servants." Then Abigail quickly arose and rode on a donkey with her 5 maidens who attended her, and she followed the messengers of David and became his wife. This is a decisive woman. When it's time to move, she moves. Clearly, the hand of God is upon her. She is the one in this chapter who is clinging to God. We see it in her words, in her insight, in her wisdom. I do wonder how she became attached to Nabal, but now she's got a man after God's own heart. David had also taken Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both became his wives. Now Saul had given Michal his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was from Galim. I keep saying it because it's so important and bears repeating. Clinging to God does not mean a perfect walk with God. A perfect walk is not even possible while we're in this human flesh. Galatians 5:17, "For the flesh sets its desire against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. For these are in opposition to one another, so that you may not do the things that you please." You know what clinging to God does? It helps you to course correct faster. You've got that tender conscience. You recognize the hand of God when he intervenes. You know it's God restraining you or redirecting you. You know it's God sending someone at just the right time to speak a word to you, like Abigail did with David. David didn't even protest, as angry as he had been, caught up in his flesh, when he saw God's hand. Okay, Lord. He course corrected. Pray for God to redirect you when you're headed the wrong way. He will answer that prayer. He wants us to cling to him, and he is faithful to keep us clinging.